to episode 8 of Love, Life, and Work in a Human World. And today's topic is forming future business leaders. As we're all experiencing a time of disruption, people wonder what the future will be like. Of course, we're struggling with the present, but some people, once you have coped with the present, people think, okay, what will the future look like? And everyone or most people agree that business will play a key role. The question is what kind of business do we need, or what kind of business do we want to shape? And then even looking into the future, who will actually lead this business? And this, this way we had the question come up. Okay, what about education? And in particular, what about the future of business schools? How do we form future business leaders? What has to change, or maybe what has changed already? And this is what we wanted to discuss. And education, as I've said, was a topic that came up several times over the last couple of weeks. This January, I had the pleasure of having met Julia Christensen in Davos at the World Economic Forum. We were both sitting on a panel on the golden rule in the digital age. And we also did a workshop together in the snow on the very same topic while having fun. So great to have you, Julia, here as our special guest.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Julia Christensen, she was a professor and the founding dean of the Gordon S. Lang School of Business and Economics at the University of Guelph. Guelph, okay, near Toronto in Canada. And without much ado, the way we do this, we have done the last couple of times, I have said, I've prepared a number of questions. It's kind of like a conversation or an interview. And then the second half of this dialogue will be open for everyone. On the other hand, if you think you have a very important comment to make, just jump in and we go from there and go with the flow. All right. But Julia, maybe tell us more about that business school, and what is it that makes it so special? Why is it so different from other business schools?
Well, when I first became dean, that was 11 years ago. Can you hear me okay? I see Donna leaning in. Is that all right? We engaged in a really extensive strategic planning process. We brought in an external facilitator who spent a lot of time running focus groups with students and alumni and faculty and staff. And the question was, what is our competitive advantage? What is our distinctiveness vis-a-vis other business schools? And for those who aren't familiar with our geographic location, as you mentioned, Thomas, just outside of Toronto, I used to describe us as being completely surrounded by all of these name brand, well-established business schools. So in Canada, you have Schulich and Rotman and Ivy, there's Laurier, McMaster University to the south. So all of these very well-funded, very well-established traditional business schools. And so as a new business school, what were we going to stand for? What was going to differentiate us? Why would students choose Guelph? And what quickly emerged, it was very interesting, was that business Guelph was different. And I should qualify. We've been offering business programs for as much as the school. So it was in bringing all of these units together, we had this opportunity to reflect, to differentiate, to brand. What came up time and time again was that people, whether students or faculty, had chosen to come to Guelph because sense that business at Guelph was different, that business at Guelph cared about community, it cared about the land. They were interested in business from a longer term perspective. And so what emerged from that was our vision to be and develop leaders for a sustainable world. And once we had landed on that, I'll just repeat that, to be and develop leaders for a sustainable world. So with that, a real focus on leadership, and leadership in any organization, not necessarily just for profit-seeking enterprises, but leadership in government, leadership in churches, leadership in NGOs, in charities, any organization, including the university sector, leadership in universities. So what is it to lead? So what is it to establish a vision, align systems, engage stakeholders, and help the organization achieve its purpose? So with that framing, we became very different, you know, in terms of our messaging, the students we attracted, the businesses or the organizations we engaged with, especially the organizations that, or the philanthropists that stepped up and wanted to support our efforts. It truly was through an alignment of values and purpose. I should add that as well as our vision, we established three guiding pillars: transformational learning, research with impact, and authentic community engagement. So really challenging the traditional lecture, asking ourselves, how can we actively engage students and in interdisciplinary ways? How can we ensure that the research effort of our faculty will truly have a positive impact on society? And thirdly, recognizing that we needed to engage with communities authentically, in a mutual learning environment where we could help them enhance issues of concern to them, but how they could also help us in terms of participating and teaching our students, providing rich learning opportunities, hiring them in co-op placements. So that really just became our vision and our pillars, and as I mentioned, impacted everything that that fell from there.
So in other words, I mean, you when you picked that vision or the purpose and the value, I mean, back then you already expected the Corona crisis, because right now it seems that with your focus, you're right there at the cutting edge, because this is like what people are looking for. So I guess you must be very happy about the Corona crisis.
No, I'm not happy about the crisis, but I would say that when we established this positioning, a lot of my peers, you know, I was also vice chair of the Canadian Federation of Business School Deans. I think some of them thought we were a little crazy. And in fact, some suggested that as soon as I stepped down as dean, that another dean would not, you know, continue on with that vision. So really anchoring it in our culture and our systems became very important to me personally. I didn't want it to be, you know, just for that period of time, but I wanted it to continue. But I have to say, I think now people are saying that perhaps we were prescient in understanding where the world might go. I mean, we didn't forecast the coronavirus, but we did forecast a change in attitude within business. And of course, just last year we've had the Business Roundtable embrace stakeholder capitalism. Certainly, as you heard Thomas at Davos, right, that was the vision of the founder, Klaus Schwab, was to really understand business in a holistic way, as an embedded way, as we like to say, business as a force for good. And so, yes, we were embracing that. And now those views are becoming increasingly enunciated, if not yet fully embraced. But I think people understand that is now the direction. And I think the coronavirus has sort of escalated now the need for that approach.
Okay. I actually I like to break a pattern, and actually like to ask some of our other attendants a question, namely Farial and Shahad, because you were or you are a student at the Langham Business School. What made you pick this particular school? Was it just because it's community located, because you like living in the middle of nowhere, or you didn't want to like, what was it that motivated you to apply to this business school, and what were your experiences or have been your experiences so far? That would be really interesting to hear. I'll unmute you, so whoever would like to go first. Fabian?
To me, the outstanding part was I guess the groups, lots of clubs was there. So a lot of participation for us as a student. So not just getting the education, but also getting involved in these activities. That was really attractiveness for me. But also, you know, the wonderful leader that we had, which was our dean, but you know, the faculties, you know, how they were so approachable, that was really attractive to me. And you know, I rather study in the area that I'm more active than just reading books. And the fact that it was also community-based, that's inspired me the most, because also I'm a very community-oriented person. I like to give back and make a difference. And that vision really aligned with my perspective. So that's what attracted me.
Great. What about you, Sahad? Can you say what brought you to Langham Business School?
For me, it was a little bit, it was just more so that I was born and raised in the city of Guelph, and so it seemed like an easy choice for me. But going to the school, I definitely got more sold on the entire idea of, I was there throughout the transition of going from the College of Business and Economics to the Lang School of Business and Economics. And so just seeing from my first year to my second year to my third year, how the school was transitioning and how we were really rising from being, what I might say is the underdogs, to really, performing well we were coming and we were placing well in case competitions. We were really starting to make a name for ourselves. And I really wanted to be a part of that shift in the reputation of our school. So I think that's something that really drove me, is just that I was seeing a movement happen within the school, and I really wanted to be a part of it.
Great. Thank you. I remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had Kim Paulman of Reboot the Future and as our special guest, and she talked about the golden rule in times of crisis. And Julia, we were actually sitting on the same panel in January at the World Economic Forum. We talked about the golden rule back then, not about times of crisis, but golden rule in the digital age. And I remember that you were saying that you actually also teach the golden rule in one of your classes. I'm interested, like, how do students resonate? And also, how do the, say, traditional faculty members, how do they react to something which is not mainstream?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll back it up a little bit and provide some context for this. So once we'd established our unique values and our approach, I realized that my background, I should say, is organizational behavior. So I study organizational change. And again, recognizing, like, how do I anchor what we're doing, and felt that it was really important that we onboard. So this, from HR, we talk about onboarding employees to a culture or a particular way of doing things. I wanted a course that would help us onboard our students to our values as soon as they arrived, right? Hoping then that they could take those lessons and those frameworks with them throughout the program. And now I'm talking about our undergraduate program. So I should say there are around 4,000 students at Lang. The vast majority, around 3,600, are in our Bachelor of Commerce program. And we also have several hundred also studying with us through an MBA or a Master's of Leadership or more traditional research-focused Master's and PhD programs. So now I'm talking about the undergrad in our Intro to Management course. So we welcome around 800 students every fall, so you can imagine that we have a challenge of scale, right? So how do you create a transformative learning environment when you're dealing with hundreds of students brand new to universities? So we spent a lot of time thinking about this course. And in fact, we went to the market specifically to hire someone to teach this course. That's also unusual, right? Typically, business schools go to the market to hire someone in strategy or organizational behavior, for example, but not to teach their first year course in Intro to Management. But we wanted somebody who was going to be passionate and creative. So ultimately, the model we landed on is that in third year, we would teach an elective course on the facilitation of learning. We would then hire the best of those students to become mentors to the undergrads. And so we could teach these 850 students in seminars of around 50 students. And and then groups within that group of 50. So really like small group instruction. I also want to add that I undertook a $12 million renovation of a building to create classrooms that would support learning in community. So very unconventional classrooms, right? That bring people together in, with sort of funky furniture, but saying your job isn't to sit in a row and look forward and be quiet. Your job is to engage with students in a messy environment and lots of noise and problem solve together. So we had well-trained senior undergraduates to be mentors and facilitators. We had the right physical space. And then in that setting, students learned about particular industries, particular companies. And then just before the end of the course, they received what we call the Great Ethical Dilemma Challenge. And in their groups, they were presented with a challenge that executives in the companies, the industries they were studying might face or have in fact faced. They had a short period of time in their group to do the analysis, to develop a polished presentation, after which, wearing suits, they presented to boards, actual executives from those companies with their recommendation. So people don't wait to do this with first semester students, right? But we are onboarding them and bringing them up to speed. It's preparing them for their analysis that the golden rule was being presented, along with other philosophical frameworks. The message that we're trying to get across is that problems are complex and answers aren't easy. Can you hear me okay? I'm just seeing an unstable. Should I block my video?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
We'll go fine.
So we want to present them with frameworks by which they can wrestle with complex problems and come up with well-reasoned solutions, right? And to also have the courage to say, having done this analysis, this is our recommendation. So it was very important to me that the golden rule be one of those frameworks that is taught. I think given, and maybe this is particular to North America, I'm not sure, but in our secular institutions, we seem to shy away from making ethical judgments. It's almost like, you know, anything goes, right? But that is not what we wanted to embrace at Lang. And so we wanted to embrace a sense of universal values of goodness, right? Where people wrestle with what is it to be compassionate and caring, what is it to think beyond oneself, to sincerely care, whether it's about employees or the environment. And so we needed to embed that kind of thinking in these frameworks. So with that course, my sense is, but again, would love to hear from others, that course has really done what I'd hoped it would in terms of getting up to speed, helping students get up to speed, understand business holistically, but then also to develop the tools to wrestle with complex problems. And I can tell you, when the first semester we did this, and I was one of the judges in the boardroom, I was blown away by the sophistication of our students, how much they'd learned, how quickly, and their confidence in presenting and really demonstrating that you can create a transformative learning environment, even when you're dealing with 850 university.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And how do you manage? How do you build a bridge, let's say, from your framework to, say, traditional economics? I mean, especially when talking about faculty members, who have been teaching traditional economics and business, and all of a sudden they're faced with a very old golden rule, more than several thousand years old. To them, it's totally new, and it doesn't really fit in their frame of mind. How do you build a bridge?
Yeah. So, well, again, we went to the market specifically to hire somebody that would teach this course, and so again, looking for a values alignment there. But I think Kathleen Rodenberg is the faculty member's name, and we were just so fortunate. But it's not just in that course, and I should add, we also offer a required course in corporate social responsibility, where students learn about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and go out and interview business leaders in the community who are making significant progress to one or more of those. So I just give those two courses examples of core courses where we really embed this content. But across the other areas, like you're saying, maybe a traditional marketing course or traditional economics course, there we're really more encouraging, cajoling, cheerleading. But when we embraced this vision, it actually went to a clicker vote, right? After holding many retreats, like we had the one grand retreat where we had sort of different taglines up on the screen, and with clickers everyone could vote. And this vision of to be and develop leaders for a sustainable world was almost unanimously endorsed. I think there was one abstention. So I mean, I really felt like I had a mandate, from the faculty. The other thing we're doing is curricular mapping amongst our various learning objectives, right? And looking at how content is represented in the different courses. So in a marketing course, for example, some of our faculty are as interested in campaigns that prevent consumption as they are about encouraging consumption. So for example, for some of our consumer behavior faculty interested in marketing campaigns that convince people to stop gambling or stop smoking. And so, you take these concepts and understand their relevance in any discipline. I'd also just like to mention at the graduate level, our MBA, we offer oh, I think that question is coming. Maybe I'll hold that thought, Thomas.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, so our MBA is also unique. We don't offer a generic MBA. We offer 3 streams, one in food and agribusiness management, one in hospitality and tourism, and one in sustainable commerce. I think it's very interesting looking at those programs, and I'll go back to your question around COVID. I don't know if people necessarily understood before the complexity of global supply chains, right? And how critical issues like food sovereignty are, or how critical local tourism is going to become now that people stop traveling, right? Or in our sustainability MBA, preparing people that really will become change makers in organizations that hire them to bring the frameworks that they've learned to apply to complex problems. So our MBA is also unique. So I wanted to share that. But we were very, very proud when our MBA in sustainable commerce was ranked amongst the best in the world 2 years running by Corporate Knights. So we got to that point very quickly, and it was a huge moment of pride. And for Corporate Knights, they do an analysis of every course you offer, looking at to what extent sustainability is embedded in that. So I just take that as validation that it's not just in a couple of core courses where we're teaching, business ethics or sustainability, but it really is spread across multiple disciplines.
Looking at the overall, I mean, you already talked about that you're very open to more, say, systemic human approach to teaching business. But what does it take for business schools worldwide to embrace a more systemic human approach to business? What does it take? And I mean, there are quite a few impediments. How can we leave these behind, and how can we, leave the old Tayloristic business paradigm? How can we leave it behind?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we did, and it's a technique I've used in other leadership roles, that if you're being a bit daring or a bit courageous, find others in the world that are equally so, because then you can support each other, right? It doesn't feel quite so lonely.
Yes.
And so when we embrace this vision, I personally joined a number of organizations. The Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative is one. And then under the auspices of the United Nations, also the Globally Responsible Leadership, that was GRLI. The second under the is PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education. And in both forums, able to connect with other business teams who are having similar goals. And so, number one is support each other. But I can tell you that business schools that have embraced not necessarily just Taylorism, but the Milton Friedman, I was really honored to be invited actually to address the United Nations General Assembly at one point on behalf of the PRIME schools. And there I talked about Milton Friedman and his infamous comment. He's written in books, made so many public addresses in the New York Times, saying that sustainability was a subversive doctrine, right? And that the only purpose of business essentially is to generate profit. So many business schools have taken those words to heart. I think Friedman has been misunderstood because he also believed in externalities, businesses suffering the cost of their impact, on the environment or on people. The problem is we have no mechanism by which that happens, right? Because he said, as long as they stay in the rules of the game. And of course, what happens is that corporate leaders were able to lobby to change the rules of the game to be in their favor, or they relocated their companies to where the rules of the game were essentially non-existent, allowing them to engage in, horrific practices in terms of human rights abuses and environmental abuses. But sadly, I think a lot of business schools really adopted that approach and were reinforced also by the business school rankings, like the Financial Times rankings, which place undue emphasis, if you the metrics, on the salary differential of MBA students from when they start the program to when they graduate. What they're trying to do essentially is establish a really attractive value proposition. Why pay $100,000 for your MBA? Oh, because when you graduate, you're going to make that much more a year. But what that did was really privilege teaching finance, and it privileged people who were interested in careers on Wall Street, and sort of embracing the whole Wall Street mentality, investment bankers, to the point where MBA programs didn't want to take people in unless they were interested in pursuing that kind of career, because so much prestige is associated with the rankings. So, and even in Davos last year, when I was at a session that was being run from the Dean of Oxford, Peter Tufano, and Peter in Oxford are very forward thinking in this space. And he had a panel of corporate leaders telling business schools, you have to change your ways. You have to start caring about people. You have to start caring about the environment. It was very interesting seeing a room full of business school deans being lectured by corporate leaders, and a couple of deans standing and saying, well, what you're sharing with us sounds interesting, but all of our prestige is tied up in our current positioning. And I was allowed to stand and say, well, there are some younger sort of upstart business schools that are doing things entirely differently. And I was really, really pleased that I had that opportunity to share a bit of what we were doing. But without any question, Thomas, there is this tension, right? If you have established a global reputation, able to charge top dollar for MBA programs with, under a certain values and value proposition, how much courage does it take to pivot? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in some of these schools now that I think is really undermining, the traditional residential MBA. It was already dying a slow death, but I think that this is only going to accelerate that.
Well, that's a good question. Because I think that in a post-COVID world, do we still need the traditional MBAs? I like to question this to a certain extent. There is of course, finance, economics, you still need this, but the question is if this should be a driver, or what should be a driver. If they just focus on the enterprise, or if they focus on generating value for human beings. This does include businesses, but not just the business. It includes employees, of course, the customers and the community. So that's, But the question is what can we do individually? We were talking about business schools, but what would you recommend that us, as individuals can do to change this or to move forward with this paradigm shift from the Tayloristic world to, say, more human world?
Well, I can tell you that as we were embarking on this journey, and I can describe it, and maybe it sounds like it all happened so smoothly, but I can assure you it was not smooth at all. But every day I was inspired by our students. They were amazing, and it really due to them that it emboldened me when I saw what our students were able to get done. And it's also why when we did the redesign of our building, it's the basement and it's not pretty, but we called it club level and made sure there was a room for every student club. So, and as well as a boardroom just for the student club leadership to provide them with space. Because the kinds of events they were hosting, we've heard about the case studies we started to do well in. they really helped elevate our brand and showed the impact, right? I think it comes down to the impact. You can have an idea, but what impact are you having? And as our students developed these skills, they became known to employers. And it was so interesting because so many employers hire from the schools the executive in that company went to, right? So it took us a while to break into that as well. But I can tell you that when employers started hiring our talent, they would come to me. I would hear this over and over again and say, Julia, I am so blown away by the talent that your students represent, and I would rather hire your undergrads than MBA students from, you know, your neighbors, the big deal schools that were our competitors. And of course, I would ask why, and they would say because they know their stuff equally well, they are humble, they are coachable, they work well with others, and that's the culture we're trying to embrace as a firm. And we need more of your talent, right? And so, so I was helped along the way by students, by employers, and of course by donors. So I do want to acknowledge Stu and Kim Lang that a year ago gave the largest gift in the University of Guelph's history, the largest single gift to name the business school. And just prior to that, from John Wood, another local entrepreneur, he named our Entrepreneurship Center. And so it's that kind of support, right? And it's the feedback that we receive from the community, also the communities with which our students, they welcome our students in to do pro. You know, it, as they say, it takes a village, right? So it takes a village to educate students for the future. And so as a dean, I felt it was my responsibility to create that village, right? And also reaching out to our alumni and celebrating their success. So much came down to just recognizing who was cheering us on, but also who was just doing really good work, and then us cheering them on, right? And that created the group. And then, as I've already mentioned, more at a global systems level, doing all I can. And that's really why I was in Davos, to facilitate and challenging the traditional rankings. And so last year we launched a new ranking called the Positive Impact Rating rather than a ranking. It doesn't name business schools sort of 1 to 50, but it actually clusters business schools to create more of a collaborative environment that are leading the way. And this is based on what students say about their business schools in terms of to what extent they feel prepared to make a positive impact in the world as a result of their education. So, you know, we need new rankings and ratings. And as I said, it takes a village. I just want to, I feel the need to make one other point about traditional business schools. I've described the traditional business school as digging the moat and pulling up the drawbridge. That they act in very insular ways on their campuses. And we've done the opposite of that at Guelph. And it's what I call ubiquity, right? The business school needs to be ubiquitous. I firmly believe that every student, it doesn't matter what their discipline is, could benefit from developing entrepreneurial skills, leadership skills, general business acumen. I believe those are the skills of this decade, right? But layered on with human skills. Everything we hear about today is empathy and compassion and communicating authentically, right? So we've made it possible for any Guelph student to take minors. We offer a series of minors that are available to any student. We also encourage our own students to take minors, to take a major, to take a minor, to take certificates, and across the institution, because we also believe that our students will benefit. And we say, build your own brand, right? Like we have the umbrella of the Lang vision, but within that, build your own brand, as well as we heard earlier by your unique participation in clubs and on with community projects.
No, that's cool. I mean, quite a few endeavors. How could we support these endeavors, either individually, or what does it take? What would be the next step of, you know, I would say promoting the systemic approach, the human approach, and the more holistic approach to business?
Well, Thomas, maybe that's a great question to ask to the others as well. I mean, as I sort of answered it as best as I can in saying, you know, be aware of who your stakeholders are and engage with them authentically. And when I say that, when we engage with community members, you know, in a lot of business schools will have their students do projects. So what I'm trying to differentiate when I say it's authentic, it's really seeking to understand where the community member is coming from. What is their need, and honoring that, right? And really supporting our students in how to engage professionally, you know, with those community partners so that they leave a lasting impact and then want to give back by hiring students or making you know, financial donations or scholarships, or simply spreading the word. I think we need to be celebrating business schools that are doing things differently, and it is starting to happen. And I just say we all have to vote with our wallets and vote with our feet. Right? That was the message I gave to students in my UN address. Vote with your feet and have your voice be heard. Fill out your course evaluations. The dean does read what you write and tries to use student input to facilitate further change.
This is great. I'd like to open the floor for you know, your questions, your comments for everyone. So you can unmute yourself, just dive in. I mean, one of the questions I would have is like, as you have heard, you know, what Julia shares, like, well, first of all, what do you think of it? Is this kind of like out there? Is it this esoteric, or how do you relate to this?
Yeah, I met John North of Global Responsible Leadership Institute in Cleveland in 2014 at the Business of Agents World Benefit Conference there. And it's like the best kept secret of business schools at that point in time. So it's evolved a long way just between, I just got the newsletter that has your article profiled in it. So I guess a couple of things come to mind. I also just finished jumping off a quick snippet in the Financial Times discussion about what business schools are doing to adapt to COVID. And I think the question I'll ask you, or just maybe put out there, is with the shift over, I mean, we've got a lot of digitization going on, the whole business of digital transformation, which in the tech world is ho-hum, but elsewhere it's, you know, way behind. What do you see is the advantage of going through a program such as yours, which is much more holistic, if I can use that term, much more interrelated, much more in sync with living systems, over what you're seeing happening in terms of responding to, you know, just kind of churning out the old? The conversation on the Financial Times this morning was like, business schools just churn out the old. They just do not change. And certainly when I tried to do something in the UK, we ran in smack into that dead systematic, you know, habitual thing where they just keep doing what they've always been doing and hoping that's going to change things. I'd appreciate just your view on that whole turnaround. Yeah, so just your overall thoughts on the, you know, how students coming out are positioned in a climate where we've got a lot going on, and these schools are hanging on to the old desperately, and then there's these gems of light such as your school that are showing the way.
Oh, thanks, Donna. Yeah, well, there's so much in your question. I'm just in my head, I'm sort of processing, you know, what the direction I might take. And maybe this comes back to Thomas's earlier question too. I think that, like, for the old schools to really get it, you know, I think they can look to schools like Oxford, right, that have so much history and so much prestige, and maybe slowly get convinced that if it's good enough for Oxford, and if Peter Tufano is leading the change, and I think that's why he brought those corporate leaders together to speak to the heads of so many traditional schools in Davos to say, you need to change, right? The talent that you're producing is not what we want anymore. And I think what's going to happen with COVID, that every path that we were on is now just steeper and accelerated, right? And so I think, you know, over and over again, we're hearing that it's leaders who have empathy. It's leaders that are effective at bringing a team together and recognizing the talents of each individual and wrestling with these, you know, these complex challenges. So I think when the employers stop hiring the graduates or stop giving them the big salaries coming out of the traditional schools, like, I think that will be a wake-up call for them. Certainly the schools that have relied on the revenues from a residential MBA are in trouble, right? And in the US, we've seen significant declines in that. I don't think I mentioned, but in our MBA program, we have residential weeks at the beginning and the middle and the end. And in between, everybody is learning online, right? And we've used those residential weeks to help the students get to know one another, sort of to learn about learning, have a little bit of the campus experience, and then get to work. Now with these, it's a cohort effect, right? So people quickly build that personal accountability to each other. I think business schools that haven't had an online MBA, right, are really going to suffer. And so there will be huge pivots in the technology as well. But as we know, you can't just take a face-to-face course and plunk it on a website and assume it will be effective. And so I think the business schools also, from a technological point of view, that we're already working in online environments will also have an advantage there, right? So you're talking about, what we teach and how we teach it. I used to describe myself as a disruptive dean. I don't know if I want to use that word anymore because there's just so much disruption everywhere. It has such a negative connotation. But I think with all the disruption that is occurring, people that try to hold on to the past aren't going to last.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did I get to your question, Donna? I'm not sure if I
Well, there was a big bundle of, as you say, a big bundle of things in there. So yeah, for sure. I mean, I was really upset when Ketrin Muff was let go of HEC Lausanne, because Gapframe was brilliant for setting up strategic conversations within companies on what do we stand for? Are we standing for profit, or are we standing for something it's a higher purpose? And so I just thought, what you've done is phenomenal, because it really has set the bar for what's possible. I mean, in other words, not all business schools will punish being ahead of your game, or even being on time with respect to, working with living systems as a way of thinking, as a brain, going into the kinds of complexity that we're in now, which is not going to go down. It's accelerating, not disappearing. So
Donna, maybe I'll just quickly say again that I didn't just sort of, decree a vision, right? But it really was an engage. We spent, I think it was about a year and a half engaging with all kinds of stakeholders that allowed that vision to emerge, right? And it was with that I felt I had a mandate to move on it. And then once we were able to get reinforcing support from the community, it really started to take hold.
Okay. If I understood you correctly, I mean, Donna, you said something, well, you don't know of any universities in the UK that has approached or embraced a more holistic, systemic approach. I'm actually curious about maybe Julie, you're in the UK, I believe, from Manchester. What's your word in it? Do you know any?
Julie Davies, yeah.
Yes,
thank you.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit what the academic environment in the UK. Is it still very traditional, or is it opening up? What's your observation? If you're still on there.
Yes,
maybe while we're
here.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about Oxford, because I think they have a great story, and I've been watching their webinars. They have some great webinars at the moment. But I met someone at the Academy of Management, and they saying some of this stuff is really putting off these hedge fund managers and private equity guys that they're hiring. So in the recruitment, it's actually deterring some students. So maybe that's a good thing. But if you can get them in and then turn them around. Yeah, at Manchester Met, I've only been there since September. There's a lot of rhetoric about local engagement. We have a lot of local students rather than a lot of international compared with a lot of other students. And I guess issues of poverty. So we work very closely at MMU anyway, with the Mayor of Manchester. So that system is very helpful. But in practice, yeah, we're just locked into endless assignments of essays that, yeah, don't really bear much relation to practice, I think. So things like they've done at Singapore Management University, you know, they send them off to poor parts of the world, these privileged kids, and get them to do something giving back to society, and assessing it. I think unless you assess it, it doesn't happen.
So what will the future business school look like then? I mean, it's like in the UK or the US, worldwide, or Canada. I mean, let's say 5 years from today. I mean, post-COVID world, what will be a typical, a good business school? Will it be the very same thing, or will they have all looked to Guelph and have learned a lesson and maybe have copied some of your concepts? What will it be like in 5 years from today?
If I don't know, Thomas, if that was for the general group, but I just want to come back to a couple comments that Julie said, yes, and then get to that. So, I mean, I don't know like all the universities. I know Bath in the UK and Exeter. I also look to them for leadership. I think they've got a lot of great work going on. But I really take Julie's point about, you know, engaging with community, and, you know, some of these trips, you wonder how much work actually gets done, or is it a privileged, you know, edutourism, as some people say. So for that reason, when we created a course in Canada where our students would go to economically disadvantaged communities, I said it needs to be here, right? It needs to be in our country. I want our students to be aware of, you know, economic challenge, you know, in our own backyard. And in this case, they went to a small community on the East Coast. And anyway, it was just, so I take your point. I think those kinds of courses have to be so carefully designed. But the other point I want to make is, and Thomas, you're being far too kind. Like, I don't want people to think that I think we're the only business school in the world doing this, because I have been so inspired by others. And there are around 700 business schools that are signatories to the UN's Principles for Responsible Management Education Initiative, and also through the GRLI. We have something called a Deans and Directors cohort, deans as agents of change. And there's around 50 or 60 business schools that are engaged with that, where we get together to talk about not just what we're changing, but how. That I helped initiate that group to say I really needed to learn from others about their strategies for creating sustainable change within the academy. So I just want to say there are lots of other business schools and lots of other deans that are doing really great work.
I know for me, if I'm looking for business schools that are on the cutting edge, I go to the GRLI membership, because first of all, it's very restricted. It's not just a matter of signing on, it's a matter of actually you have to be doing something. So you know, it's actual integrity. This is what we're actually doing. And I think that really speaks highly to the quality of the work that GRLI have been doing for a long time, quite a long time now. So,
well, definitely in our post, you know, once we talk about this recording, we'll include the organizations you mentioned for people to learn more about this. So again, let's be optimistic or maybe pessimistic. Who knows? Where will we be in, say, 5 years from today? Or say, maybe even more bold, let's say 10 years, where will we be?
We haven't heard from Jay. Maybe Jay wants to take a stab.
Yeah, Jay.
Julia and Thomas, thank you so much for this conversation. You know, Thomas and Dawn and I, we meet with a group of transformation thought leaders, and you know, I think for the past 5 years, we've been saying it'll be 5 years before the business schools change. Every year we keep thinking it's another 5 years, like Donna just mentioned. I had been tracking this. So I'm a Kellogg product, and then I was asked to come back to Northwestern to teach an advanced entrepreneurship course. And so I developed and delivered the first it's for under the McCormick School, so not in Kellogg, where I thought there was more opportunity for entrepreneurship. The first alternative class. So it was for students that had their own ventures, already had started their own ventures in like a earlier entrepreneurship class, and then they actually wanted to do it, and so they applied as a team. And then I brought them through a lightweight MBA in a way. It's an agile management approach, and delivered that for a number of years. And so then looking at the demand, we've touched on the demand side, which I think is really what will eventually change the MBA schools. So I've just spent a couple of years with a large consulting company, and the clients that we're dealing with are mostly legacy clients, you know, and they're traditionally operated, and the consulting company is still largely demanding people with traditional skills, you know, in recruiting at the business schools. And so there isn't yet the demand. But what I wanted to ask you about is the supply side. Let's talk about that. So what I found in trying to bring an entrepreneurial mindset and operations to students at Northwestern is that students get into these top schools by being skillful at standardized tests, which you know, reward for convergent thinking, not divergent thinking. You know, being problem solvers, learning to be experts, which I think is has been the traditional, you know, value prop of the MBA. You become an expert in a particular area, right? But you're describing a different type of education, one that I was and do advocate, which is, you know, learning to be collaborative and solve for complexity and work in team-based environments and the skills needed for that world. How do you? But our education system up to, you know, secondary is still largely based on a traditional model, right? We're still largely rewarding students for standardized and convergent thinking. So what's been your intake process?
Yeah. So it's interesting hearing you talk, Jay, and I'm a little bit familiar with Kellogg because my MBA and PhD are from Schulich in Toronto, and of course there's the joint Kellogg Schulich MBA.
Yes, I joined with some.
Yeah. So when you're talking about business school, what I hear you really saying is MBA, and I guess that's one of the things that I'm trying to challenge, because of our 4,000 students, only a couple hundred are in our MBA program. And so I think just off the start that a business school can be so much more and needs to be so much more than the MBA. That an MBA is such a sort of a privileged and focused undertaking, whereas for me, I'm so proud that we offer a minor in entrepreneurship that any student at the University of Guelph can take, like over 20,000 students, or they can simply just take workshops out of they get businesses around. And I can tell you that more students that are engaged with that come from outside the business school. You know, so many of them are botanists or engineers or computer scientists that are hungry to learn about entrepreneurship. And so, you know, again, I see that the business school has been the ivory tower within the ivory tower, you know, rather than more sort of servant leadership approach where we're here to serve the student body. And I can't tell you the number of times when I was challenged, like, why would we do that? That my response was because it's the right thing to do, you know, because it's the right thing to do for the students, right things to do for society. And as a business person, you will be shocked to hear that when I was making those arguments and when we're serving these students from across the institution, my budget as a dean did not go up a cent. Our resources were set, and I was trying to do everything we could to serve from that. So it was regardless of the enrollments. And that's why I became such an externally focused dean. I was so dependent on bringing in money from outside the institution, from people, you know, who believed in our vision and you know, believed in how an education in entrepreneurship could be so powerfully positive for the local community, because so many of our business entrepreneurs actually choose to continue to reside in Guelph, right? As you know, as well as for the Canadian economy. And I can't remember the statistics, so I don't want to misquote, but the vast majority of the students or the businesses that we've incubated are still in business, which I think is remarkable. And we also run them through a mini B Corps certification. They don't actually become certified, but we want them to be aware that the principles that B Corps embrace, so that as they're designing their business, that they might start to include some of those aspects from the very beginning. Now, again, I don't even remember your question now. I'm so sorry. I might have gone off on a tangent. Maybe I was reacting more to, you know, equating MBA and biz school, but I think that certainly is the case in the majority of business schools, that is the dominant paradigm. And so I guess I'm saying that's another paradigm that I've challenged.
Yeah, and I was challenging too at Northwestern. There were certain things we could teach in undergrad, right? And they're still, I think, developing their first undergrad entrepreneurship program, which my course would have become part of. But yeah, my question was around sort of the qualifying. Have you had a need to qualify the students for your? You talked about your intake, and you know your initial onboarding, so to speak.
Yeah.
But is there also some filter that you use prior to that, or?
Yeah, at the undergraduate level, all of the applications are grades based, and it's done through the registrar's office. As the business school, we don't actually have direct engagement with that. I had thought it would be great if we could have a letter from students speaking about their leadership roles in their high schools and their communities. My time as dean ran out before I had had the opportunity to see that idea through. I really take your point, Jay, and I do believe that grades aren't everything, and especially grades that have been earned through a rote learning approach. Mm-hmm. You know, where we want people who are creative thinkers, are innovators, have shown by what they've achieved, again, in their high school or in their community. At the MBA level and the Masters of Leadership level, that is where we have more of an opportunity to hear from people and their stories. And those are the kinds of questions that we ask in that process. Again, what we're looking for is a values alignment.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
You know, talking about leadership, I mean, there is so much we can talk about. You know, leadership is everywhere. I mean, the Drucker Forum this year, that's their topic: leadership for everyone, for everywhere. Very creative. I'm not sure if they will still talk about traditional leadership, or if they talk about human leadership, or what really distinguishes us from machines, you can say. And looking forward to the next couple of weeks, and also our dialogues, and we'll catch up on this. We'll address these topics. You know, right now at this point, I'm in contact with the author of the best-selling book Joy Inc., Richard Sheridan. He actually may join us in one of our future dialogues, as well as the former managing director of LinkedIn Europe. So we'll see when we hear about conscious leadership, we hear about joy as a driver in business. And I think we'll be able to learn a lot about how we can shape the future and make it a more human, a better world. So thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. And thank you for your insights about forming future business leaders. And thank you all for attending and participating in this dialogue. As usual, it will take me a couple of days to edit the recording. If you object to having it, say, on my YouTube channel, let me know. But looking at the statistics, there are at least some people who like to watch and listen to our dialogue. So I think it is valuable, and we can learn a great deal. And who knows, maybe some other students at Guelph can watch this later on and then approach you and say, "Hey, Julia, what have you talked about? Can we talk more about this? Or what did you mean by such and such?" So anyway, thank you so much for joining in. Thank you for your participation, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you very soon and seeing you in person. So stay healthy, stay well, and thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Special thank you to the students on the call.